Welcome on this session. On this session, we are going to discuss the adverse effects of cephalosporins. We already discussed, we classified the cephalosporins, and we discussed what is the antibacterial spectrum, we discussed the therapeutic uses. Now we are discussing what are the adverse effects of cephalosporins. Number one, they can produce hypersensitivity reaction, about 2%, rashes and drug fever because they have got a beta-lactam structure. So there's a liability to produce hypersensitivity reactions. Nausea and vomiting is a remarkable feature of cephalosporin use, and some patients do suffer from remarkable nausea and vomiting. Then intramuscular injection can produce pain, and the repeated intravenous injections can produce thrombophlebitis. They have cross allergenicity between cephalosporins. So if you are allergic to one cephalosporin, you're likely to be allergic to other cephalosporins. And they've got partial cross allergenicity with penicillins, and that's why if the patient is hypersensitive to penicillin, generally we don't go to use cephalosporins. Next important adverse effects of cephalosporin is interstitial nephritis. I would just like you to remember this, because if you think of penicillins are supposed to be drugs with high therapeutic index, but still if you go in details and ask what could be the adverse effects of penicillin, then I want to remind you methicillin that produced interstitial nephritis, and because it's a beta-lactam structure, it's important to remember cephalosporins also produce interstitial nephritis. Since we are discussing chemotherapy, I would also like to give you a reminder is aminoglycoside is another group of antibiotics producing nephrotoxicity, but aminoglycosides mostly produce tubular necrosis, whereas penicillins and cephalosporins, they produce interstitial nephritis. So interstitial nephritis and renal damage, that's characteristic of cephalosporins. Cefaloridin was the most toxic, most nephrotoxic cephalosporin. That's cefaloridin. Cefoperazone and ceftriaxone are important drugs. Look at the slide, I have made them green. It's a green signal, because even if the patient is suffering from renal dysfunction, you could use cefoperazone and ceftriaxone, because they are mainly excreted or they are secreted in bile, and then they are excreted through feces. So very less amount goes to the kidneys. So even the patient is suffering from renal dysfunction, you could use ceftriaxone and you could use cefoperazone. The next adverse effect of cephalosporins is bleeding, and this bleeding can be on the account of production of hypoprothrombinemia. They decrease prothrombin levels, and that leads to hypoprothrombinemia. This could lead to bleeding. There's another mechanism in some other group of patients who are suffering from glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. In them, there could be hemolysis. So bleeding on two accounts in two different groups of patients. Number one, hypoprothrombinemia, and number two, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Next important adverse effect of cephalosporins is, if you are receiving a cephalosporin, you should not drink alcohol. You should not consume alcohol, because cephalosporin produce alcohol intolerance. They have got a disulfiram-like effect to inhibit the enzyme acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. That's called typical antabuse-like or disulfiram-like reaction. So by chance patient is on cephalosporin and consumes alcohol, is going to get a severe reaction, especially with the consumption of cefotitan, cefoperazone, cefamandole and cefaclor. Disulfiram-like reaction is known. Next one, I hope you understand cephalosporins have got quite an extended spectrum of activity, and this is why they can lead to diarrhea, they can lead to superinfections like pseudomembranous enterocolitis. Remember few things about cephalosporin. Number one, cefaloridin, most nephrotoxic. Number two, interstitial nephritis with cephalosporins. Number three, disulfiram-like reaction or alcohol intolerance. Next, bleeding due to two mechanisms. One, hypoprothrombinemia and hemolysis in patients with glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. The next one to be remembered is ceftriaxone, useful for resistant gonorrhea and resistant typhoid fever. And the in vitro or pharmaceutical drug interaction of cephalosporin with the other antibiotics like aminoglycosides, tetracyclines or chloramphenicol. You can't combine aminoglycosides, tetracycline, chloramphenicol with cephalosporin in a syringe. So it's in vitro or pharmaceutical drug interaction. Although this combination is useful for treating mixed aerobic anaerobic infections, and this combination is going to lead to drug synergism. So that's some important facts about cephalosporins. Now we move on to other beta-lactam antibiotics. One of the important groups of other beta-lactam antibiotics is called carbapenem. They are synthetic substances and they have to be injected by intravenous route of administration. Examples are imipenem, ertapenem, meropenem and ferropenem. Imipenem gets broken down by the dehydropeptidase enzyme. The dehydropeptidase enzyme is from the kidneys, that's secreted by the brush border of the proximal convoluted tubule. So this way this imipenem gets broken down, and this could be responsible for two things. Number one, the levels of imipenem in the blood fall, and number two, imipenem could get converted into toxic metabolite, and this could produce toxicity. So conversion of imipenem by dehydropeptidase has got two implications. If we stop this conversion, we are going to get two advantages. Number one, imipenem will not be broken down, will not be lost in urine, will be reabsorbed, and there will be better plasma levels of imipenem. Number two, because it's not getting converted into a toxic metabolite, the toxicity of imipenem is going to be minimized. Do we have a substance to do it? Yes, we have. The name of the substance is cilastatin. Cilastatin inhibits the renal dehydropeptidase. Cilastatin inhibits the imipenem breakdown. Imipenem-cilastatin combination could be used for this purpose. And please remember, cilastatin is not an antimicrobial agent. So what we were discussing was carbapenem, and I told you one important fact and one important drug interaction, that's imipenem with cilastatin. Let's move on to know more about the carbapenems. Carbapenems are broadest spectrum antimicrobial agents. They have got activity against many gram-positive organisms, many gram-negative organisms, and also activity against the anaerobes. They are resistant to the beta-lactamase enzyme, although we can't rely on them for MRSA, but they are resistant to the beta-lactamase enzyme. So should we use them regularly? No, we don't use them regularly. They are very novel and very different kind of substances because they have got a very broad spectrum. So we reserve them for life-threatening hospital infections. It's not used daily. If the infection is life-threatening, a hospital infection, very difficult to treat, then we think of using carbapenem. The adverse effects of carbapenem include gastrointestinal intolerance, drug fever, cross-allergenicity, and two important adverse effects. One is precipitation of seizures in susceptible patients, especially known with imipenem, and the second one, which is known, is renal damage like other beta-lactam antibiotics. Now actually, if the patient has renal dysfunction, the dose of carbapenem has to be managed, has to be given in less dose. Amongst the other beta-lactam antibiotics, the next group is monobactams. And under the monobactams, we have one drug, aztreonam, has to be injected intramuscular or intravenous. Aztreonam is resistant to beta-lactamases. It's got a very narrow spectrum and it's useful mainly against the aerobic gram-negative bacilli, having good activity against Pseudomonas and Serratia. And the most important point about aztreonam is it is useful if the patient is allergic to penicillins. Please remember, it's a beta-lactam antibiotic. Whenever you are allergic to one beta-lactam antimicrobial agent, you are likely to be hypersensitive to all the other beta-lactam structures except aztreonam. So if the patient has penicillin allergy, cephalosporin allergy, you can still use aztreonam despite being a beta-lactam structure. We don't get allergic reactions in this patient. So aztreonam to be remembered for penicillin allergy. It doesn't have cross-allergenicity with penicillins or cephalosporins. Next we discuss the predisposing factors for staphylococcal infection. I think this is the right place to bring in the discussion of this issue. What are the predisposing factors for getting resistant staphylococcal infection? Number 1, diabetes. Number 2, indwelling intravenous catheters. Next one is neutropenic patients. Next, the intravenous drug abusers are likely to catch up staphylococcal infection. Next, patients who are on cancer chemotherapy are more susceptible to get the staphylococcal infection. Mostly, these staphylococci would be beta-lactamase producing. So that's very important to remember with the association of these predisposing factors. And they could be coagulase positive and catalase positive staphylococci. So that's some important word about the staphylococcal infection. And at the end of the discussion of the beta-lactam antibiotics, let's again have an overview of the chart which was showing you the alternatives to penicillin. Have a look at it. We said the drugs inhibiting cell wall synthesis is cephalosporins, next carbapenems, and next monobactams. That's Astrio now. So I showed you this chart because you should know where are we, and we should not get lost in the ocean of these antimicrobial agents. So we came up to this: cephalosporins, carbapenem, and monobactams. On this side, as far as cell wall synthesis is concerned, we have vancomycin, teicoplanin, and daptomycin to be discussed. On the other side, we have streptogramin and linezolid. We have clindamycin to be discussed, and then macrolide antibiotics. So we came up to cephalosporins, carbapenem, and monobactam. Let's move on to the next slide, and naturally we discuss now vancomycin. Now it will be easy for you to remember that vancomycin inhibits cell wall synthesis and it's a cidal agent. It's a glycopeptide antibiotic and it's got a very typical binding site. Is the D-ala muramyl pentapeptide. That's D-alanine muramyl pentapeptide. This is the binding site. It sterically hinders the transglycosylation reactions. So it prevents its release from the bactoprenol lipid carrier. It prevents the release from the bactoprenol lipid carrier. D-ala muramyl pentapeptide is caught, and the drug vancomycin prevents its release from the lipid carrier, and it's going to hinder the transglycosylation reactions. So there will be inhibition of the elongation of peptidoglycan chains which are required for the cell wall synthesis. There is decrease in the assembly or inhibition in the assembly as well as the cross-linking. So vancomycin is acting at the early stage of cell wall synthesis. It inhibits the cell wall synthesis, and this is why it becomes cidal. Please mind well, vancomycin doesn't combine with penicillin binding proteins. This is why I am telling you vancomycin inhibits cell wall synthesis, but whatever drugs we discussed until now, they were combining with the proteins and they were producing the effect. This doesn't combine with penicillin binding proteins. It binds at the D-ala muramyl pentapeptide. Continuing the discussion of vancomycin is useful against the resistant strains, that's MRSA, but you can get resistant strains to vancomycin which are called VRSA. You can also get Enterococcus which is vancomycin resistant, that's called VRE, vancomycin resistant Enterococcus. And what does it do? It produces change in the muramyl pentapeptide target. What's your target? D-ala muramyl pentapeptide. So what the organism will do is going to change the terminal D-ala and is going to be replaced by D-lactate. I hope you understand. If a drug is coming in the microorganism, it needs the D-ala structure for binding. Now what the organism is doing is changing its own D-ala structure into D-lactate. So that's the mechanism of development of resistance. Vancomycin has got very fine penetration across the tissues. That's the bones, serous cavities, and the inflamed meninges, but it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, cannot enter the central nervous system. It's excreted unchanged by glomerular filtration. So that's going to be dangerous. If the patient suffers from renal dysfunction, then we need to decrease the dose of vancomycin. Let's discuss the adverse effects of vancomycin. Number one, a very typical adverse effect is called red man syndrome. Why red man? Red man because vancomycin liberates or releases histamine. When histamine is liberated, there's vasodilation, and because of the vasodilation, you get facial flushing, and because of this flushing, it's called red man syndrome. There will be chills, fever, urticaria, flushing, and other skin manifest. All this is happening due to histamine release, and there could be fall in the blood pressure. We need a better alternative to vancomycin in those patients who are more susceptible to get this histamine release, and that's why we will mention about teicoplanin. That will be a better alternative to vancomycin. The next adverse effect of vancomycin is ototoxicity. Ototoxicity in the form of nerve deafness. It may be permanent, severe, and irreversible deafness. So you mind well, vancomycin is a toxic agent. It can produce ototoxicity. You need to take care if this patient is also receiving aminoglycosides, because aminoglycosides are ototoxic, and other ototoxic drugs. That's very important. And the last characteristic toxicity of vancomycin is nephrotoxicity. So I hope now it will go hand in hand. Aminoglycosides and vancomycin, both of them ototoxicity and nephrotoxicity. And vancomycin in addition producing red man syndrome. Let's have a look at the spectrum of use for vancomycin. Can be used against MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, then the Streptococcus viridans, Enterococci, Clostridium difficile, a very important indication for the use of vancomycin. Clostridium difficile induced pseudomembranous enterocolitis. Then the gram-positive cocci, you can use it against Neisseria, Clostridia, and diphtheroids. Uses of vancomycin include, yes, that's what I'm saying, pseudomembranous enterocolitis, that's on the top, and especially clindamycin induced, because clindamycin is most susceptible to induce pseudomembranous enterocolitis and infection by Clostridium difficile, a super infection. Next, it's a drug of second choice for this, because the first choice for pseudomembranous enterocolitis is metronidazole. That's going to be a safer drug as compared to vancomycin. So metronidazole is the first choice, vancomycin as second choice, but it's very important for pseudomembranous enterocolitis. This pseudomembranous enterocolitis is produced by broad spectrum and extended spectrum antimicrobial drugs, and you could use vancomycin by oral route of administration 125 to 500 milligrams every 6 hours. Then you can think of using vancomycin for infective endocarditis. That's a very common indication. And penicillin allergic patients with enterococcal endocarditis, along with gentamicin, you can use vancomycin, taking utmost care about the nephrotoxicity and ototoxicity. The other uses include bacterial meningitis, along with the ceftriaxone, as well as the 4th generation cephalosporins or cefotaxime. You can think of using it for penicillin resistant pneumococcal infections and empirical therapy of infections. That's febrile neutropenia. Patients suffering from neutropenia, getting an infection and getting fever, that's called empirical therapy. Patients on cancer chemotherapy are also likely to be susceptible to infections. You can use vancomycin for this. And the patients who are on dialysis, they are likely to get infections. Just now we said vancomycin is toxic and we need to have an option. We need to have an alternative. Yes, we have an alternative. That's teicoplanin. It's a newer glycopeptide and it's a mixture of 6 compounds and is useful only against the gram-positive bacteria. It's more active than vancomycin for enterococci and it's equal against MRSA and some VRE, but it can't be used against VRSA. So I just said we need a better substitute for vancomycin. It could be teicoplanin, subserving the same purpose as vancomycin, because it's got less nephrotoxicity, less histamine release, and less chances of hearing loss. All these adverse effects of vancomycin are comparatively less with teicoplanin, and it's a longer acting agent. So this is teicoplanin. Teicoplanin is useful against enterococcal endocarditis along with gentamicin, useful for MRSA, streptococcal infections and osteomyelitis. which we already mentioned. Next we move to daptomycin. This is another option. We were thinking about the MRSA. That's why we came to this. Daptomycin is lipopeptide antibiotic and is useful in Staph aureus bacteremia. Staphylococcus aureus bacteremia. It's also useful for Staphylococcus aureus endocarditis, skin and soft tissue infections by Staphylococcus. Now let's move to discuss some other polypeptide antibiotics. Whatever drugs we are doing right now, right since vancomycin, they are all polypeptide antibiotics. These are low molecular weight cationic polypeptides and they are toxic. That's why they are not used systemically. So I am not bringing them in for MRSA for resistant organisms, but just to complete the list of the polypeptide antibiotics. They are obtained from bacteria. So there's polymyxin B, which is for gram-negative bacteria, colistin, which is also for gram-negative bacteria, and you have bacitracin and tyrothricin. Polymyxin B and colistin, they enter between the phospholipid and protein layers in the cell wall. So this is how they go inside the cell wall, and they have a detergent-like action. That is distortion of the membrane, formation of the pseudopores, and leakage of the amino acids and ions out of the cell, and they inactivate the bacterial endotoxins. They are synergistic with all the drugs which are acting on cell wall synthesis. That's the beta-lactam antibiotics, and they help the penetration of the beta-lactam antibiotics. They are useful against the gram-negative organisms, as we already said, and that's Pseudomonas, Salmonella, and Shigella, except you can't think of them for Neisseria, Proteus, and Serratia. There is no oral absorption or absorption from the skin. There is no demonstration of resistance, and if given orally, they can lead to gastrointestinal intolerance like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. If you give them systemically, they can produce histamine release, just like vancomycin. So there could be flushing. In addition, they produce paresthesia, they produce renal damage, they can produce central nervous system adverse effects and neuromuscular blockade. How do we use polymyxin B? Polymyxin B is used as powder, eye drops or ear drops, what you call neosporin, polymyxin B. Then colistin is also used as skin, eye and ear infections, that's skin ointment, ear drops, eye drops or eye ointment to treat the skin, ear and eye infections. Colistin can be used by oral route of administration because we say it's not absorbed, so it will be active in the GIT. So you can think of using it by oral route for E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella diarrhea and Pseudomonal enteritis. Lastly, bacitracin is useful against gram-positive organisms, Neisseria and Haemophilus. It acts on the cell wall, it produces the ionic efflux and produces cidal effect. Bacitracin is absorbed by oral route of administration and is highly toxic, and especially it produces nephrotoxicity. Nobody is going to think of using bacitracin by systemic route of administration due to the reasons of this toxicity. We're going to use it for wounds, ulcers. We're going to use it in the eye with neomycin or polymyxin as powder, drops or ointment. There's no skin penetration of bacitracin. That's why it's not useful to manage the boils, carbuncles or furuncles. Tyrothricin is a mixture of gramicidin and tyrosidin, and this produces cell membrane leakage and uncouples the oxidative phosphorylation, as useful against gram-positive and gram-negative organisms.